And now the Deeper Thinking podcast, a daily exploration into how philosophy, psychology, and technology shape how we think, feel, and live.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. There are patterns of thought that seem at first like maturity. They whisper warnings, offer conclusions, frame discomfort as foresight. But beneath that fluency lies something more delicate, the quiet mechanics of how we try to protect ourselves from not knowing. Some minds do this not by escaping the present, but by scripting the future, again and again, until the imagined outcome feels safer than the open question. This essay traces that instinct without naming it. It moves softly with structural precision and emotional care through the textures of uncertainty, vigilance, and inner narration. Rather than diagnosing or correcting, it attends. Its tone is not one of instruction, but companionship, walking alongside the reader through the architecture of anticipation and the choreography of imagined collapse. Philosophically, it draws on an unspoken lineage. There are echoes of Heidegger's dread, Weil's ethical attention, and Murdoch's gentle clarity. The breath of Merleau-Ponty lingers in its bodily awareness. Sartre's suspicion of false narratives flickers beneath the surface. And within its pacing, a phenomenological ethic emerges, the refusal to rush meaning, to leave space for the not known. Psychologically, it sits in quiet dialogue with the frameworks of cognitive distortion, narrative therapy, and attachment theory, but without analysis. It understands that some habits of mind are not flaws to fix, but stories to unlearn. That language can be both symptom and salve, and that sometimes noticing the shape of a thought is more powerful than replacing it. What follows is not a solution. It is an atmosphere, a place where the interior world is treated with the same gravity as the philosophical, where thinking is allowed to be tender, where the sentence before the conclusion is held open, not to create suspense, but to restore the possibility that things might unfold differently than we fear. We often mistake the imagination for evidence. A silence arrives and we grant it meaning. A delay occurs and we furnish it with tragedy. This isn't merely anxiety, it's the confusion of the possible with the real. In catastrophizing, the mind attempts to protect by rehearsing pain. It generates fictions so densely threaded with feeling they begin to resemble fact. But what we're really doing is surrendering to a narrative more vivid than experience, more certain than the present. This reveals something fragile about how we relate to the unknown. The catastrophizing mind does not wait for events, it assigns them in advance. Not from arrogance, but from fear of emptiness, the kind that uncertainty makes visible. It replaces ambiguity with dread and then calls the trade realism. What we call overthinking is often the desperate wish to avoid falling through a gap in meaning. Still, this is not a failure. It's a rhythm we learned, one that once served a purpose. We imagine the worst not because it's true, but because at some point it kept us prepared. This isn't a choice, it's a habit, a way of making sense of what once blindsided us. We mistake vigilance for insight, sorrow for foresight. We try to control the future by pre-living its collapse. But seeing the pattern changes it, not by force, but through attention. A small space opens, the thought doesn't vanish, but it becomes visible. The story can be noticed rather than obeyed, and in that noticing comes a quiet kind of freedom. We begin to say, this is fear, not prophecy. This is imagination, not inevitability. It's not a matter of optimism. It's something subtler, a gentle withdrawal from the role of narrator, a willingness to live in the sentence before the ending, to let the mind imagine and not follow. This episode stays in that sentence. We trace how the worst-case voice arrives, how it builds, and how we might stop mid-scene, mid-line, and choose not to rehearse it again, not to deny what hurts, but to meet what is, not to brace for what might, but to remain, just for a moment, in what is still unfolding. Catastrophizing rarely announces itself. It enters in fragments, a shift in tone, a pause too long, a message left unanswered. The mind stitches these together, not with curiosity, but with certainty. Suddenly, a neutral moment is recast as warning. We don't recall deciding this. We only know we've arrived somewhere bleak. The thought isn't, this might be bad, but this is the beginning of the end. And it feels like knowledge, like insight. like realism. But it's something else entirely. There's a strange comfort in it. The imagined collapse, however painful, provides shape, a completed story, a closed loop. It gives meaning to what would otherwise remain open, unclear, unresolved. It hurts, yes, but at least it's coherent. This coherence can be seductive, especially when we've lived through uncertainty before, when we've been taught that not knowing is dangerous. In those moments, dread feels like preparation. Pain feels like control, and certainty, even when it's terrible, feels safer than ambiguity. But there's a cost. The more we tell these stories, the more we live inside them. The more we live inside them, the more we miss. A friend's pause becomes a rejection. A delay in reply becomes abandonment. A glance becomes disapproval. Not because they are, but because we are already inside the ending. And when that happens, the world becomes confirmation. Every silence, every hesitation supports the fear. We don't see people as they are. We see them through the lens of what we've already decided they'll do. This isn't self-indulgence, it's self-protection. A pattern built slowly, often through repetition. A way to stay ahead of harm by predicting it, by deciding first before someone else gets the chance. It's a survival script. But survival scripts can overstay. They become reflex. And eventually, they become walls. To loosen them doesn't mean denying pain. It means making space around it. Asking, is this a memory or a moment? Am I responding to now or to what then taught me to expect? These are not abstract questions. They change tone. They change breath. They shift how we wait, how we speak, how we stay. And they begin gently by noticing the voice that says, I know how this ends, and answering, maybe, but maybe I don't. There's a certain elegance in the mind's ability to complete a scene before it's played. It watches a breath, hears a tone, senses a pause, and fills in the rest with exquisite speed. This isn't random. It's learned. And over time, it becomes invisible. We no longer realize we're writing endings. We think we're remembering them, not from the past, but from the future we're sure is coming. This is the quiet authority of catastrophizing. It doesn't just suggest, it insists. And in its insistence, it begins to shape us, not just in how we feel, but in how we move, how we soften our speech, preempt discomfort, prepare explanations before they're needed. We don't call this fear, we call it being careful, thoughtful, responsible. But underneath, there's a tremor, a sense that we're holding the world together, watchfulness, that if we let go, stop scanning, stop scripting, something will break. We don't know what exactly, only that it will be our fault. But this form of care isn't neutral. It carries a cost. It keeps us distant from presence, from ease, from surprise. It turns relationships into performances, interactions into tests. We smile not because we feel ease, but to prevent harm. We listen not to hear, but to anticipate what might go wrong. And all of it, every word, every pause is governed by the unspoken premise. Something is wrong, and I must find it first. What gets lost in this is not just rest, it's truth. Because when we approach others through the lens of anticipated rupture, we don't allow for ambiguity, we don't allow for grace. We interpret neutral moments as loaded, and by doing so, we respond to shadows, not people. And then, without meaning to, we create the very distance we feared. The shift begins with noticing this mechanism, not in theory, but in sensation. The breath that tightens. The question that turns into a search for failure, the conversation we don't enjoy because we're too busy decoding it. These are signs, not of weakness, but of rehearsal. And rehearsal can be paused, even briefly, long enough to ask, what would it feel like to respond without the ending already written, to enter a moment without trying to survive it? That question, once asked, changes the atmosphere, not the facts, but the way they're held. Some distortions wear the mask of maturity. They sound like responsibility, like insight, like self-awareness. I just want to be prepared, we say. I'm not being negative, I'm being realistic. But beneath these sentences lies a quieter truth. We're bracing. Not because we're wise, but because we're afraid. We're afraid of missing the moment the world tilts. So we pre-tilt it ourselves. At least then we're not caught off guard. But this comes at a price. It narrows our view, turns nuance into risk. We interpret pauses as judgment, slowness as disinterest, calm as impending rejection, not because they are, but because we've already positioned ourselves on the edge. From that edge, neutrality looks hostile. And connection, when it arrives, is met not with relief, but with suspicion. because we've learned not to trust ease. We've learned that good moments are just preludes to loss. This isn't a conscious decision, it's a sediment of experience, the result of moments where we were blindsided, where comfort ended without warning. And so the body, the mind, the language all adapt. We call it overthinking. But really, it's a choreography of defense, a way to stay ahead of grief, a way to pre-hurt, so the real thing doesn't arrive unannounced. And yet in all this preparation, we lose the thing we were trying to protect. We lose contact with others, with ourselves, with the moment as it actually is. Because when every interaction is filtered through a lens of collapse, we never get to feel the warmth of what's still intact. We never get to know the present, only the fear of its ending. The invitation, then, isn't to stop being cautious. It's to question the reflex, to ask whether this fear is an echo or a signal, whether the conclusion we've drawn is based on now or on then, and to remind ourselves, gently, again and again, that just because we've rehearsed an ending doesn't mean we have to perform it. There's a space between knowing and fearing, a space where we don't yet assume the worst. And in that space, however small, something else can live, something that doesn't need defending, something that doesn't need to be right, only present. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.